Hey everybody, I decided to do a little Bible digging on Egypt. I think in the last couple of days here, it's June 30th, 2013 right now as I record this, and in the last couple of days there's been all sorts of turmoil in Egypt, and a lot of people go right to the Isaiah 19 passage, which kind of outlines, this struggle inside of Egypt, and it has an end times cast to it. And I agree that I think that is a good outline for what's going on in Egypt. What I decided to do is this is going to be two videos. This first one here is just going to be an overview and then a look at the outline of what the Bible says about Egypt in the end times. And then I'll do a second video, which will probably be a lot longer, but it'll be more of a Bible study of those passages about Egypt. And there, again, if you're into Bible prophecy, I think you'll see that there's some really neat stuff we get into in the Bible study part. But let's just recap right now what's going on in Egypt. So here in Fox News, again, it's June 30th here. Egypt protesters gather to call for Morsi's ouster. And I guess he's been in power exactly 1 year. I think that's why these protests have really broken out. But tens of thousands of opponents of Egypt's Islamist president massed in Cairo Tahrir Square and the cities around the country on Sunday, launching an all-out push to force Mohamed Morsi from office on the 1 year anniversary of his inauguration. And fears of violence were high. Morsi's Islamist supporters vowing to defend him. And so there's this big clash, and we've talked about this in other videos, that the Muslim Brotherhood, headed up by Morsi, took over all the government and ousted both the military rulers and all the political rulers and replaced all the leadership in Egypt with Muslim Brotherhood people, and they're trying to bring in Sharia law. And there's a whole bunch of secular Islamic people and Christians and others that are completely against what's going on. And so there's this big internal turmoil. Now, I guess there was, I think, 15 million, in a different article I saw, signatures for the ousting of Morsi. So this isn't just, tens of thousands of people around Tahrir Square. They've got 15 million signatures from across the country, and I believe the population in Egypt is 60 or 70 million, if I remember right. So, that signature drive got a large percentage of the population, if you think about it in terms of getting signatures for a protest there. So that's big news. And then kind of on the strange and odd side, a lot of people probably saw this, but what this is in Egypt, the statue of Osiris, which many of you know, Osiris can be tied back to Nimrod in just after a flood, ancient Babylon. This statue's been sitting for decades in this museum, and it started turning by itself. Now, this is a security camera that looped over a few days, and we'll take a look here. Hang on. Okay. Now watch up here. This black statue. See it turning? And a little bit more. And just a little bit more. And again. Okay, so that just happened recently within the past week or so here, that the security camera in this museum caught. I backed up a little so you could see it. This statue of Osiris, which is this uh, angel of death, I think is how the Egyptians thought of it. But Osiris, goes back to uh, that whole worship of Nimrod from ancient Babylon, which, all these pagan religious beliefs eventually end up back in the original Babylon after the flood. And Nimrod, in his many names, after the dispersion and the separating of the languages at the Tower of Babel, Nimrod shows up with all these names afterwards. But he was a demigod, a product of fallen angel mating with um, human women, and that Nimrod is worshipped as Osiris out of Egypt. It's also, if you study New World Order uh, and the Masonic beliefs of the Illuminati, they also talk about Osiris again in the same way, that he was basically this ancient demigod, and all these cultures in the current day, whether it's the South American cultures, the Incas and the Mayans with Quetzalcoatl and their view of this Nimrod god, all see him as returning in the end times. And I think from a biblical standpoint, we think that that matches up really well with the Antichrist. And in the Old Testament, he was talked about as the Assyrian, which Nimrod founded the city of Assyria and the like. So I've got a whole series of videos on that, called the series on my channel, Tinfoil Hat Time, because you have to build basically that whole program. You have to see it in the Bible to know it's believable, but if you also study the New World Order, the Illuminati, their belief systems and all that, the all-seeing eye, the pyramid that's on the back of the dollar, all that, it all ties back to this character Nimrod from ancient Babylon right after the flood and the Tower of Babel. And then, that program we show in the series of videos I got is probably what is coming back around in the end times here for the Antichrist, and Mystery Babylon being a replay of the original Babylon and everything coming full circle. And that's what we postulate, that's what we show from the Bible. And if you stick with me in part 2 of this video, we're going to see that that comes up again in relation to Egypt and the activities of the Antichrist when it gets into Egypt, and some really interesting stuff in Ezekiel 31:32 that again points to this repeating theme that this is a replay of ancient Babylon coming forward again and being seen in the Antichrist in the end times. So that's all really, for me, pretty cool. Now, the other thing that's happened recently, back a year or two ago, with this whole Arab Spring, and in Egypt, there was actual footage here. Let's just take a quick look at this. And you can see here something that looks like it looks like a horseman, or the pale horse of the apocalypse from Revelation 6, and it appears in this mass demonstration during the Arab Spring that went through Egypt in Tahrir Square. It appears that this ghostly image rides through the crowd. And then you'll see, if you go out on YouTube and you look, people trying to say, well, there's a few artifacts in this video that moves when this thing moves through. And so they say, well, it's just a camera artifact. Although if you watch the video, let's see here. That's quite an artifact. And You can see things moving with it here, here, and here. So whether that's um, a camera artifact that happens to look like a rider on a horse moving through the crowd, or what it is, nobody really knows. There was also artifacts, and I'm not going to represent them, but the same type of thing can be seen in the tsunami that occurred in Japan, and I guess there's 2 or 3 other apocalyptic horse ghostly images in different other natural disasters that have happened in the last couple of years. For me, all it's saying is we're in the end times, and um, we were told in the Bible that there would be wonderful and awesome sights that come upon the people in fear, and so seeing these doesn't surprise me, and I don't think all of them can be camera artifacts if you go and you look through all of them. So that's kind of what's going on around Egypt current day. We've got possibly this demonstration which may very well turn into something like a civil war, and we're going to take a look at this outline of what happens to Egypt out of the Bible, and then we see more supernatural things like this statue all of a sudden spinning on its own in the museum, and then from a few years ago, whether you trust this video footage or not, it was on live TV. These horses moving through these different large demonstrations here in Tahrir Square, as well as some of the natural disasters that have occurred. So that's kind of a lot of stuff kind of pointing to the supernatural and the fact that we're in the end times. Now let's go through. I'm going to show you an outline of what's in the Bible, and then we're going to end this video. And if you're intrigued by what I say, let's come to part 2 and we'll actually do the Bible study. Okay, so here's a little outline. I'm sorry it's not so graphically intense, but I just did this in Notepad on my PC, going through, and Egypt is a tough one in the Bible because there's so much history, and I tried pulling out what I think are the relevant parts of the history of Egypt in the Bible that points us to the end times of Egypt. So, I left out the parts where, for instance, Jacob and his sons end up in Egypt. I left out Moses. I left out the Exodus, right? So I left out all those parts about Egypt. But let's just kind of replay through some of the stuff that I grabbed on. So we see in Ezekiel 29 here, the reference is probably to the time of Nebuchadnezzar when he came, swooped down. This is while Nebuchadnezzar was conquering everything and consolidating the Babylonian Empire. Now, this is called the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The original Babylonian Empire was Nimrod right after the flood in the Tower of Babel. Then you come forward a few thousand, it'd be a few thousand years, and you end up with Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And again, this was a world empire at the time as well. And the huge walled-in city of Babylon, the Hanging Gardens, which was one of the wonders of the world, one of the ancient wonders of the world. That Babylon, now Neo-Babylon. And in 568, 567 BC, Egypt is conquered by Babylon. And this is during the time, again, too, when Jerusalem was taken by Babylon in 586 BC. So you can see this is the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar when he came through, and he kind of wiped through Egypt, dispersed and captured a bunch of the people and dispersed a bunch of the people and took the women and children, and Egypt was basically demolished until Cyrus, the Medo-Persian Empire, took hold of the Babylonian Empire and put it down. Now that that same event was also what freed the Jews to go back to their land. Um, but in the case of, when Cyrus did this, Egypt also began to be restored. And there's a controversy here in these Ezekiel 29 passages because it says Egypt would be laying waste for 40 years. And different Bible commentators that I looked at said that it probably didn't go a full 40 years between the time Nebuchadnezzar took Egypt and then when it was restored under Cyrus. So I guess it's not quite 40 years, and so there's this question about what's that referring to. And I'll argue possibly here that what we're seeing, and we'll see the reverse of this in further passages, that this is part of a near-far prophecy, and what we're going to see is the pattern of the king of Babylon taking Egypt. Is the pattern is set down in Ezekiel 29 with what Nebuchadnezzar does against Egypt back in 568, 567 BC, but then it's the image or the pattern that's being established for what will happen in the future, and that's going to be my argument, and I think there's lots of scriptural support coming to that. The next thing that happened is the Egyptians returned to a lesser Egypt, and that definitely happened. And the idols of Egypt tremble in the presence of the Lord. Now I switched over because what I'm trying to do is build as best I can a chronology, and so we move, from this period of time, which is 500s BC up to current, which is what most people see is happening now in Isaiah 19, and so. Definitely through the Arab Spring, a bunch of things happened, but as part of that, when Morsi came to rule, he put down the governing council that was in charge, and they were consulting their idols at that point. So it's very interesting how those passages play out in the first verses of Isaiah 19. And Hosni Mubarak, was put into jail, and so it was ruled by this governing council of the military, I forget, for several months anyways, until Morsi's election happened. And those military rulers were the ones that were consulting the idols. And that whole thing, if you read Isaiah 19, you see that the governing council gets put down, and what comes from that is first civil strife, which we saw the protests in the streets of Tahrir Square and all that, and then they get a fierce king and a cruel master, and that's seen in Isaiah 19:4. And a lot of Bible prophecy people say this is very likely where we're at right now, is that we've seen the Arab Spring come through, we've seen Morsi elected, and if we're in the end times like we all believe we are, that this is probably what's going on right now. Some other little things that come out of Isaiah 19 in these passages, that the waters are dried up. Now it's in the King James Version, it says waters of the sea and the rivers are dried up. And when we go in the Septuagint, it's a little more specific that the rivers are dried up in Egypt. And in the last video I did, we talked about how there's a dam being built, proposed being built on the Nile right now, which would potentially stop the water of the Nile flowing into Egypt, or at least put it out of the control of the Egyptians. You also see this reference to trusting in the counselors, and their spirits will fail, and that's probably a current day event as well, because you see the actions being taken in Egypt right now under Morsi appear to all be backfiring. Okay, and then the next thing that we see is the land of Judah becomes a terror for Egypt, and the Lord brings judgment, and 5 cities are taken by Israel, Isaiah 19:16 through 18. And I didn't catalog it here, but we know in Psalm 83 according to Bill Salas, that Egypt is part of the coalition that comes against Israel in that Psalm 83 war. So is that what causes, Israel to come in and take 5 cities out of Egypt? Now, in this passage, it's the hand of the Lord that brings the judgment, but 5 cities are taken by Israel, and so those things line up pretty well. So I think, we're just before this now. We're thinking Psalm 83 is very close, and so we're waiting to see if that happens. And what's the next thing that I put in the lineup here? We get this reference to the day of the Lord is near. The time of the Gentiles, or the end of nations, has come for Egypt, and it falls along with their allies. And then these allies are listed: Ethiopia, Libya, and I think Ethiopia included the Sudan. If you go look in the Bible what ancient Ethiopia reference was, Libya, Lydia, and the mingled people, which is kind of curious, and Chub, which Chub, nobody has a great idea what that means. Some references I looked up said it was Northern Africa, the Islamic nations of Northern Africa, which would make some sense with these other nations that were listed. Or in the Septuagint, I put an S after it there for Septuagint, the Cretans are referenced. And that has a bunch of other interesting connotations if that's true. The Cretans of the Bible, and I think it was Titus in the New Testament, Paul talks about the Cretans being liars. And in sort of biblical tradition, they not only were liars, but they were the priests of Baal. Could this have some connection, as it's listed here in the Septuagint, to the the priests of Baal being the ones that were supporting or worshiping Baal, and Baal being again worship of Satan or Nimrod as sort of the indwelled satanic spirit of old. So that's just curious, and I can't make nothing of that because there's no real hard data on that one. And then we see a fire coming upon Egypt in that day, and so that now I'm trying to put these in order. That's bringing us down to the just before the day of the Lord, or at the day of the Lord, and we're in Ezekiel 30, 1 through 8. Okay. And then there's a curious passage. Messengers go out from the Lord in ships and destroy Ethiopia, or the Ethiopians. It's just an interesting fact. But the destruction, I guess the broader point is the destruction is not contained to just Egypt. When this happens here, and these are allies of Egypt at the time that this fight happens. And so again, if this is pointing to Psalm 83, potentially what we see is Israel on the other side of this fight, or the Lord and Israel on the other side of this fight. Okay. Then next, if I'm got these ordered correctly, we get some other curious things that are said. And I will also make the multitude of Egypt cease by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and his people. Now this is in Ezekiel 30, 10 through 19. But it's specifically talking about the day of the Lord now. And so it's really curious how can Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, from 586 BC, be referenced in a passage that's the context is set in the day of the Lord. And so this is where I see what's going on, is that the pattern was set at the beginning up here at the top, where Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed and laid waste to Egypt, and yet it didn't lay waste for a full 40 years, and so it's partially fulfilled. I think this reference down here to Nebuchadnezzar is the future fulfillment being demonstrated now. And I think in much the same way that the king of Babylon came into the land of Egypt, took captive uh, a bunch of the people and killed a bunch of the uh, armies in Egypt and the people of the land. I think we're going to see the same repeated pattern happening again here in the end times. And so that's what I think is being set up here. And that's the only time Nebuchadnezzar, I believe, is referenced again in Ezekiel 30, 31, 32, which continue this whole theme. After that, what we see is reference, I believe it's the only time, we'll see as I go down here, but mostly it's referred to as the king of Babylon after that, which again, to me, I think this is pointing to not only the Antichrist, but the Antichrist coming full circle from the original Babylon, Nimrod, or some representation of Nimrod, coming around doing the same thing, following the same pattern as the original destruction of Egypt by Nebuchadnezzar. Then we see the Lord will make the rivers dry. That's in Ezekiel 30, verse 12. They will know it's from the Lord. That's an important point. It gets repeated. Here we go. The king of Babylon breaks the arm of Pharaoh and scatters the people so that they know it's from the Lord. And that's in Ezekiel 30, verse 20 through 26. And it's the same pattern as what happened up here. And this is why I think this was a near-far prophecy. And I think the far fulfillment is this day of the Lord fulfillment. And it looks back and it has the same pattern. The king of Babylon comes into Egypt, breaks the arm of Pharaoh and his leaders, is what it actually says in the passage, and scatters the people. The pattern is being repeated. Then, again, I'm trying to put these in order. The Antichrist comes through the land and takes Egypt after putting down the king of the north and south. And you can see that in Daniel 11. So I'm trying to order these, and I'm saying this Nebuchadnezzar king reference and this taking by the Antichrist of Egypt, I think also is replayed again in Daniel 11. And so I know a lot of people that talk about this today on YouTube talk about the Antichrist spirit coming through Daniel 11. They say this has already been fulfilled. And I guess I'm just too much of a Bible literalist. What I think is that the Antichrist himself is actually going to move into the land of Egypt, just as it was saying here in these verses. And he's going to put down on his path the king of the north, and then the king of the south has always been the Pharaoh of Egypt. And so I think that's what we're seeing here in Daniel 11 is a literal fulfillment of the Antichrist coming through. And it's supported again by all these passages in Ezekiel. So I feel pretty good that we're still looking for Daniel 11 to be fulfilled in that way. Then Assyria and his people are compared to a cypress tree in Lebanon. And this is where the real fun starts. So in Ezekiel 31 here, there's a whole bunch of embedded symbolic meaning in this passage. And it's almost like in Ezekiel, you get Ezekiel 36 and 37 talk about the restoration of Israel, but I think it's in Ezekiel 37, you get this vision of the dry bones being reassembled, and people, it's this crazy kind of visionary thing, but it ties pretty good to what happened after the Holocaust, and you see all these, starved Jewish people basically being rescued out of the Holocaust and restored to their land. That kind of imagery, call it imagery text, or I don't know if you'd say it's poetry, but the same kind of thing is happening in Ezekiel 31. And so I believe that, in general, prophecy is given as a historical narrative in advance, meaning historical narratives in the Bible flow from a beginning to an end in sort of a chronological way. And a good example of that is taking a look at Ezekiel 36 and 37, the restoration of Israel. You flow into 38 and 39. They've been restored to the land, but then you have this major invasion from Russia and its allies coming in trying to take it. And then in 40 through 48, you see the temple of the Lord being built. And so it's very chronological. And so I'm seeing the same thing here in Ezekiel 29. Um, Ezekiel 29, we see the early fulfillment of the king of Babylon, or Nebuchadnezzar, coming into the land of Egypt. And I think in chronological order, although there's a few thousand-year skip in here, once you get down to Ezekiel 30, we see the repeat of that pattern happening, and now we're in the end times, or in the day of the Lord times as it happens. And then you get into Ezekiel 31, and you see this imagery kind of text coming up. And boy, it really, here's when we get into the Bible study, we'll really see that this is definitely talking about the Antichrist, and it's talking about it's supernatural in this text, and we'll show that this comparison to the tree or to the trees, the roots go down into the abyss, and that powers this tree to grow. And so not only is it imagery, but it's very much Antichrist, supernatural and spiritual. And so this is kind of a key text to drill into. Okay, and he is delivered into the ruler of nations, who throws them down into the pit of Hades and the abyss, and the kings in the abyss lament for him. That's in Ezekiel 31. And when you read the passage, it feels very messianic here, and that Jesus, when he returns in his second coming, puts down the Antichrist. That's what it's saying, and throws him into the pit. And if you compare that to Isaiah 14, it's spot on. It's saying the exact same thing with just different language. Then getting toward the end here, the king of Babylon and the giants are put down in Egypt. So it's a replay of this passage, but in Ezekiel 32, it's a lot more clear when we look into the Septuagint that this king of Babylon and his hordes that are coming into Egypt are giants, or call them Nephilim or whatever, but in the Septuagint, this is how they're referenced. And then the next little snapshot we get is once this king of Babylon and his giants are put down, they're thrown into the abyss, or hell, or Hades. And down in Hades is also Elam, which is an area in Iran right now. Meshech and Tubal, which you'll recognize from Ezekiel 38 and 39, is the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal was Gog. And so again, there's this reference, if you want to say, to the next one of the other great battles that come against Israel. The rulers in that battle have been put down into Hades as well, and their multitude with them. And then it talks about Edom and the prince of the north and Pharaoh. And so I think what we see in that reference, and that was in Ezekiel 32, 24 through 32, kind of a long section of text, but it's showing all the other people who are in Hades or hell that greet or meet the king of Babylon and his giants when they get there. So that, to me, is wrapping up sort of the program of the Antichrist into Egypt. And then I would order this Isaiah 19 passage. Egypt returns to the Lord after being struck, and he is healed. And then we get what I think is after that is millennial reign kind of time frame. Egypt will have a highway to Assyria and be a blessing in Isaiah 19, 22 through 25. So there's as best I can do, the program for Egypt in the end times. And if you want to come with me, and I think it's at least one more video, we'll go through some of these passages and show how I kind of got this ordering to things, and then we'll see some, and I'm going to focus quite a bit on making the point that the Antichrist shows up in these passages, that he's referenced again as sort of the Antichrist or Nimrod, indwelled demigod from old, coming back into the end times. And you'll see this, if you want to say, real supernatural aspect of the Antichrist and his rulers that I called out in the tinfoil hat series that I did. And we talk about that he's the king of Babylon in the end times. So that's what I got, and I hope you stick with me for the next part. If you're into a Bible study, that's what the next part will be. So thanks for watching.